Okay, good. Want to welcome everybody in here to our class tonight. We'll be talking about the chapter 23, called to faithfulness. And let me see it. Does everybody? Can everyone hear? Okay, if you can let me know. I got most everybody muted right now, but you can unmute yourself and just. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I got you, boss.
Okay, good deal.
5 by 5.
All right. What about the background noise of my noisy grandsons that are painting in the other room? I guess.
Tell them to paint quietly.
There you go. Well, the painting goes quietly enough. It's the exuberant singing that kind of gets wound up. So, oh my, to have that much energy again, I don't know. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody here tonight, and here we are in our last couple of chapters. We'll finish off next week, and then we'll go into the book of Judges. But for right now, we're in chapter 23. And that particular chapter, it's kind of the beginning of Joshua's, I don't know, I guess just his end game, because he's getting old, and so let's go ahead and read that. Now it came to pass that after many days, when Adonai had given rest to Israel from all their enemies around them, and Joshua was old and advanced in the years, that Joshua summoned all Israel, their elders, their judges, and their officials, and said to them, I have grown old and am advanced in years. So what is that advanced, or after many days? What does that all mean? Well, actually, after many days means that this is about 14 years after they had gone into Canaan, and about 7 years after they had divided everything up. So at this point, Joshua is about almost 110 years old. He died at 110, and unlike Moses, what the Bible says, that at 120, Moses, that his vigor had not diminished and his eye was not dimmed, and so forth. Joshua didn't fare that well, and he knew, he was coming down to the end of it, and so this is why he wanted to gather everyone together and say, okay, well, this is the last, my parting shot to you guys. And so, this was a time where they'd had 7 years of pretty much relative peace, and all of the land had been divided up. Now, there was one problem, and that the Canaanites had not yet, not all of them, there were still pockets of pagans just living in Israel, and Josh was telling you need to get these people out of there, and the Lord had told him, says, you need to get everybody out of there. I'll drive them out before you. But the Israelites and the various tribes had grown complacent, and they had not driven these people out, and of course that's going to cause them problems from then on out. But Joshua called all of Israel together. Now, what does that mean? All of Israel together. It doesn't mean that he called the entire population of Israel together. No, the Bible here just kind of clarifies it, and he said they brought the elders, the heads, the judges, and the officers, and all of these different people. That's kind of like four four classes, different classes of rulers. But the term elder, and that's just to denote all the representatives of the people, and within that there were the heads of the group. That was the heads of the clans and the tribes and their fathers' houses and so forth. So there was a lot of division within that as to who these people actually were. And then you get on down to judges. Now this would be civil administration people, because you got a couple of million people, you got a bunch of cities now. At least, well, I don't know how many cities there were. We know that there were 48 Levitical cities, and so they need administration. Even back then in the late Bronze Age, the early Iron Age, um, there had to be rules and regulations that people lived by within within their cities, and judges to judge things back and forth between people. So those were the people that Joshua called to come down to wherever it was that he was. The Bible doesn't really tell us whether he was at Shiloh, where the tabernacle was, or whether he was at Timnath Serah, where he actually lived. Or did he go to Shechem, which was another place that they had meetings, when they would call Israel together. And so we don't really know. Now here's the site of where the tabernacle actually was. This is in Shiloh, and here's the outer perimeter of where the tabernacle actually was. And it was there for almost 400 years, and it stayed there until the the Philistines came and captured the Ark of the Covenant, and so then when they recaptured the Ark of the Covenant, got it back, they actually moved it to Jerusalem, and that's when David started gathering all the materials together so that Solomon could build the temple. All right, so here's the other place that it possibly could have been. This is the modern Nablus, and this is the two mountains where half of the tribes got on one side and the other half on this side. One of them they shouted out the blessings, and the other side they shouted out the curses. And I think Joshua's his altar that he built is up here on top of, it's Ebal and Gerizim are the two mountains here. And within this, the way that this thing is cupped, it's kind of a natural amphitheater. And so that was a good place for them to have meetings. But we really don't know where this meeting that Joshua called, where it actually occurred. So it could have been in one of three different places, Shiloh, Shechem, or in Timnath Serah, where Joshua lived. We don't know. I don't. I don't guess it makes any difference. But so going on the third verse, it says, "Now you have seen all that Adonai your God has done to all these nations because of you, for it was Adonai your God who was fighting for you. Behold, I have allotted to you as an inheritance, according to your tribes, these nations that remain, along with all the nations that I have cut off from the Jordan to the great sea, toward the setting sun. So Adonai your God, he himself will thrust them out from before you and drive them from before you, so you will possess their land, just as Adonai your God spoke to you." Now, it would have been easy at this point, in his life. Here he is, 110 years old. He's just about to die. He's a revered person in Israel, because remember now, he would have been at least 20, 25 years older than the next surviving person in all of Israel, because they all died out. Everybody that was over the age of 20 died out in the wilderness, and Joshua was somewhere between uh, 20 and 25 or even older at the time. Well, Caleb was 45 years old when he went spying, so maybe Joshua was the same way. He was a clan leader. So anyway, uh, it would have been very easy for Joshua then to, kind of accept the accolades of his people, so that he would get his Academy Award for a lifetime of service and so forth. But he didn't. He reminded Israel that it was God that was responsible for all their victories, and it wasn't Joshua. So, Joshua's really to be commended here at this point, that he would take that kind of an attitude, that he didn't even mention himself very much there at all, and it was only in passing, but that it was God who had done all this thing. He gave all the glory to God, um, all of the credit for what they had done. He gave that to the Lord. All right, so all of the land had been allotted. They'd given all the land to the different ones. The Levites, even, they got their cities and so forth. But the Canaanites, there were still a lot of them that still remained. Over in Gaza, that area there's a lot of people that were still remaining there, the Philistines and so forth. And then that was, David spent a whole lot of his time trying to clean up that mess, and they were always at battle with them in the judging period. Samson had some spectacular clashes with the Philistines, and of course they ended up blinding him, so that then a spectacular last victory where they were in a big building and celebrating their victory over Samson, and so he pulled the house down on them and killed more in that incident than he had in all the other battles that he had had. So there were constant battles that Israel had to face over the years, because they did not push these people groups out of Israel, either push them out or exterminate them, as God told them to do. If they would just have gotten out of Israel and gone someplace else, they could have lived. But if they chose to fight Israel, then God said, okay, they've chosen to fight, then go ahead and kill them. So the thing about it is, these Canaanite armies had pretty much been defeated. They were broken up into pieces, so there was no longer any organized resistance. But Israel just allowed them to stay, and is more probably through the laziness of Israel than it was for any bravery on the part of the Canaanite. And then Joshua talks about how that they had cleared the land from the Jordan River to the Great Sea, where the sun goes down, the Mediterranean Sea. And it was basically what we see as Israel today, from the Dead Sea and the Jordan River westward to the Med, and it hasn't expanded a great deal. I mean, during Solomon's reign, it got a lot bigger, but then it was quickly reduced. Any comments or questions so far? In verse 6, it says, be very resolute to keep and do all that is written in the book of the Torah of Moses, so that you may not turn aside from it to the right or to the left, and not intermingle with these nations who are still remaining among you, do not mention the names of their gods or swear by them or worship them or bow down to them. Now, here Joshua is basically, he's given his parting instructions to his people that he knows he's at the end. He's given them his final preaching here, and there's some important stuff here that he says you got to keep the Torah. You've got to do all of those things that are written there in the Torah of Moses, so that basically to keep you on the right track. You need to be on the right track of where God wants you to be on the right path, and that if you keep the Torah, then you're not going to turn to the right or to the left. You're going to be on the straight and narrow. Joshua recognized, from his own experiences with the Moabites and so forth at Peor, that assimilation was a great danger. And in fact, in this time frame that we have here, when all the armies have been defeated, that assimilation was a greater threat to the success of Israel than would have been a direct frontal assault against them. That it's kind of like in Europe today, where you're not going to have a frontal assault of the Muslim countries on Israel. So what are they doing? They're just moving in, migrating there and assimilating and overpopulating, and that's going to be the downfall of Europe. Europe is probably already lost for generations to come. And that's what Joshua recognized with these other people, that we have to just do not, and he'll say it again later, just don't assimilate, don't mix with them, don't have anything to do with them. And but the problem with it was that the lure of the pagan gods, that was strong. And there was another problem with that they had the tabernacle in Shiloh, and really the way that the Lord had told the people to worship was that they had to go to where the tabernacle was 3 times a year. Beyond that, there was no recognized infrastructure of worship anywhere else in the land. That, like, after the exile, where the Israelites, the Jewish people, came back from exile in Babylon, they had established during that 70 years, that's where the synagogue system came to be birthed. It was in Babylon. And so that every village or something, they would have a synagogue that their worship was centered around. But at this point in Israel's history, there was only one. So if they let the people live around them, then they would see these people with their idols and so forth, and Israel looked at that, and for some reason they thought that, oh well, it's better to have an idol that or something that represents a physical thing, even though maybe it's just a big old stone sticking up out of the ground, or something that we can carve up and say, yeah, this is our God. It's unbelievable how that they could look at the one true God and say that, okay, that was inferior to something that they could make up with their own hands. But that's exactly what did happen. And Joshua was telling them, said, look, don't even say the names of the their other gods, or Don't swear by them, and don't bow down to them. Don't worship them at all. Don't have anything to do with them. So it was something that Joshua could see that was going to happen, pretty much. And Moses saw it before him, and so here he is trying to shortstop it, trying to convince the people that this was not a good thing for them to do. But that's just the way the people were. Okay. Going on to the verse 8. But cling to Adonai your God as you have done to this day, for Adonai will drive them out before you, great and mighty nations. As for you, no one remains standing before you to this day. All right. So this word or this phrase, I guess, cling to Adonai, that is it's repeated several times in the Bible, and it's to mean holding on, very, very, very tightly. In some cases, it's like clinging to Adonai is akin to a belt around the waist that will cinch up your clothing and so forth, something that's very close and tight to you. And it says to hang on or cling to Adonai. And it's the thought behind it is to hang on tightly, like as if your whole life depended on it, that your very life depended on it, because actually it does. And there's some of the prayers that we say in the Siddur also to speak of clinging to God with all your strength and all your might. And so Joshua tells them that, look, if you do this, then you can expect that God is going to drive these people out of your path, and they get rid of them and push them away. But we really don't have any evidence or any written record of an individual tribe saying, okay, I've got these pockets of pagans just within my territory. We're going to go ahead and call in the reserves. We're going to get our army together and take these people out, push them over into the sea, or push them up into Syria, or Jordan, wherever these other areas outside of the land of Israel. No, there's no record of that whatsoever. It's much later that the individual tribes under Saul and then the other kings have to go and fight the Canaanites, the Hivites, the Girgasites, and all these different kind of ites there. So that's that. Here, Joshua is saying, just hang on there. You have to be close to God and stay as close to Him as you can. You remember other places in the Bible where God says, "Look, if you will, if you'll come close to me, I'll come close to you." So that the closer you try to get to God, the closer He wants to be with you. So there is no limit to that. Okay. Going ahead with are any comments or questions so far? Verse 10 says, one of you can put 1,000 to flight, for Adonai your God, He Himself is fighting for you, just as He said to you. For your own sake, therefore, be most mindful to love Adonai your God. You can look at this kind of as God being a force multiplier. That in the military world, we talk about a force multiplier being something that you may have, or perhaps the enemy has, that would give them actually an advantage or greater strength than they normally would have had. And so God was Israel's force multiplier, And how much was a force of the multiplication was he in? The Bible says that here that Joshua was saying that that one of you can put 1,000 to flight. So God is multiplying Israel's effect by 1,000%. And so, because why? Because he himself is fighting for Israel. And therefore, Josh was saying, look, he's fighting for you. He will cause you to, to be enormously successful, much more so than anything that makes any sense, just crazy successful, 1,000 times more than what you could do yourself. And for that reason, then you really need to be close and love God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because it's definitely in your own interest to do that sort of thing. And the idea of loving a God like that can increase your abilities 1,000 times, or worshiping this rock over here that sticks up out of the ground. Okay, God, rock, and guess what? They chose the rock. Unbelievable, just crazy. So, but it was something that they could hold in their hand, or something that they could actually physically touch, rather than the invisible God that they couldn't really. He was outside of time and space. He really couldn't be touched. He couldn't be felt. They had long since, the generations had, they by this time they were dying out, where they had seen the fire by day and the fire by night, the cloud by day, and the Red Sea. That generation was quickly dying out, where they'd crossed over the Red Sea. So that's that's why these people. I'm not. Well, I guess I am making excuses for them, but that was one of the reasons then that they did what they did, was because they felt like they needed to worship something, and a physical entity was easy for them in their minds. Plus, all of their pagan neighbors were doing the same thing. So you figure, okay, well, we'll do that like our neighbors are doing, and hopefully that's going to work. And it, eventually it got down to the point where God was saying, I'm really mad at you guys, because now you're even throwing your children in the fire, like these people that worship Molech. So anyway, it got really bad, really bad. But Joshua's exhortation to Israel was the very most important thing that you need to do is to love God first. That's with all, everything. And we still to this day quote the Ve'ahavta, where you love God with all your heart, soul, and strength, everything that you've got. And that's what Joshua is saying here now. So verses 12 and 13 says, now, if you ever go back and cling to the remnant of these nations that are still remaining among you, and you intermarry with them, and you associate with them, and they with you, know for certain that Adonai your God will no longer drive these nations out from before you. Instead, they will become a snare and a trap for you, a scourge in your sides and thorns in your eyes, until you perish from this good land which Adonai your God has given you. Now, there, if you read the Hebrew there, it's all, in the English, it kind of says, well, if you do this, if you go in there and intermarry with the people, and so forth. But the Hebrew, you're looking at it, and it just as easily can say, when you go back. It was almost a foregone conclusion that that's what they were going to do. And so and I wouldn't call it a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm just saying that the way that the Hebrew is written, that it could go either way. That and an if or when you do this. This is the second time now in just a couple of verses where Joshua says, "Don't intermarry with these people. Keep them away from you." Um, Israel didn't learn their lesson from this until much, much, much later, after the Babylonian exile, and even even to the point of the um, uh, once the Hasmoneans came into power after the Maccabean revolt, and they kicked out the Antiochus Epiphanes. At that point, then Israel started getting to the point, says, we have to segregate ourselves from the world because we have really, really suffered because of this. And so that's when they started doing it, to the point that once they got to the first century and Yeshua's there, and then he's gone, the Israelites, the average everyday Israeli, it was pretty much halakha. If it wasn't actual written down in law, it was certainly the halakha that you do not associate with the foreigners, the ger, the non-Jewish people. You certainly would not have fellowship with them, a meal with them. And so that was, of course, that caused a lot of growing pains within the body of Messiah after his ascension, when Peter and Paul were trying to make up the rules for, okay, how do we deal with all of these pagans that have now become believers in Yeshua? Okay, now we need to somehow extend to them the right hand of fellowship, and that was going against the halakha of the day. The end result of that, if they do intermarry, God's going to say, okay, look, I'm not going to protect you anymore. You take on a Canaanite wife or a Hittite or a Girgashite or what, I don't know, all these different ones. It's on you, bud. I'm not going to protect you from that. And especially you start taking on their gods. And never could figure out why it was that when the men would marry these pagan women, they would always, with almost without exception, and I can't think of any exceptions, that the women would entice the men then to give up the one true God and worship the rock sticking out of the ground, or the little carved image that somebody had carved up. You don't see anything where, okay, if a pagan man takes an Israeli woman, then she converts him to Judaism and the belief in the one true God. That just didn't happen. And then the men, if they married a pagan woman, they always went her way instead of the other. So instead of vice versa, with taking a pagan woman and then turning her into a nice Jewish woman. It just didn't happen. Then, of course, we know what the end result of all of that was, is that it was an exile, because they had gotten to the point where there was so much idol worship and idolatry and so forth, that God said, okay, that's enough. I've had it with you guys, and so we're just going to take you out of the land for a while. And that's exactly what he did. The first batch was Assyria coming into the northern tribes, and they took away about 5 to 7% of the population, mostly the rulers, the educated people, the literati, the ones that were very educated. Then they came in and populated Assyria, then populated that area with some of their own people, further diluting the worship of the one true God up there in that part of the world of Israel. And of course, that's what we now look at is the Samaritans, and that's why Israel then after the exile was over, they looked with such disdain on the Samaritans because they said they were deluded. Their gene pool had gotten dirty, and so that's why Samaritan was a kind of a dirty word among the Jews of Yeshua's time. Verse 14, now today I'm about to go the way of all the earth. You will know with all your heart, with all your soul, that not one word of the good things which Adonai spoke concerning you has failed to happen. All of them has come to pass for you. Not one word has failed. Joshua knows it's kind of an interesting way that he said, I'm going to go the way of all the earth. I came from dust, I'm going to go back to dust. Normally what they would say was that, and he slept with his fathers, that meaning that he had died. That was a colloquialism for saying that he died. But Joshua's saying, I'm going to go the way of all the earth. And then he goes on and talks about the heart and soul, with all your heart, with all your soul. I looked it up, looking this stuff in the Hebrew, that, with all your heart and with all your soul is much more emphatic than just in the English. It means, every part of your being when they say the heart and soul, because you've got the heart, meaning, your basically your flesh, your body, and then the soul, the nefesh, the neshama, that part of your being. So you wrap all of that up together. It's everything that you are. And so with everything that's within you, everything that you are, that not one word of the good things that God spoke failed to happen. Every part of it happened. And so we see that word tov, good things, 5 times within these 4 chapters here, or 4 verses, I mean. And it just, again, emphasizing the character of God that Joshua was trying to portray here. That everything that good, everything that he said was good, then it did occur, it did happen, just like God said it was going to happen. And so he turns it around on him. Now, in verse 15, he said, now it will be that just as all the good things which Adonai your God has spoken to you have come upon you, so all the evil things will Adonai bring upon you until he has wiped you off this good land which Adonai your God has given to you. When you transgress the covenant of Adonai your God, which he commanded you, and go and worship other gods and bow down to them, then will the anger of Adonai burn against you, and you will perish quickly off this land, this good land which he has given you. All right. So what Josh was saying is that, okay, that within everything that you've got within you, I mean, down into everything that is you, that God, his word is true. The things that he said would come to pass have all come to pass. We've had all these fabulous victories over the last few years. And so if you know that God does everything that he says he's going to do, all those good things, then you've got to also believe that the bad stuff, when he says the bad stuff is going to happen, then you can bet that the bad stuff is also going to happen, just like it did on the the good stuff. All right, so he kind of brings it back to them in that regard. Now, the word here in verse 16, where it says that you will when you transgress. Now look here, this is the translation where it says, and when you transgress the covenant of Adonai your God, which he commanded you, and you go off and you worship other gods and bow down to them, then God is going to be very mad at you. His anger will burn against you. And anytime that things just do not go well for the person who's going to be burned, it says you will perish quickly off this good land which he has given you. And the Babylonian exile, man, that was it really occurred within just a matter of weeks. And Nebuchadnezzar came in there, besieged the place, and the next thing you know, I mean, they're gone. Everybody's gone, and he carried off the population. The good bit of the population was gone, and they brought them back to Babylon, and they were gone for 70 years. And then maybe 20% of the population actually moved back to Israel. Not very many. So anyway, this word transgress in Hebrew, be'av rechem, and there it is in Hebrew, is to literally, it means to cross over or to violate. And so this brings up this mental picture of crossing back over the Jordan River and basically undoing all of the good things that God had given to Israel. All of the victories they had, all of the wealth that they had accumulated by the victories in Canaan. All those things, all of that would have been undone if they go and start following these other gods, because we know that he's a jealous God, and he doesn't like it when we worship these false images and false gods. And so that's what Joshua is trying to warn Israel about, that this is what's going to happen to you if you do this. If you cross over, literally cross over the covenant and cross over God's law, you're going back in time. It's just as if all of these victories and everything that we've got have been wiped out, and that's the end of the victories, and that's the end of Israel, and that's exactly then what did happen. That Israel was exiled for a period of 70 years in Babylon, and when an empire came and conquered a group of people and carried them off into exile, it was definitely not a pleasant experience. Much of the time, the men were emasculated, and of course the women, well, they had no say in what happened to them either. So it was not a good time. The Babylonian exile was a very painful experience for Israel. So, all right, that is the end of what Joshua was talking about in chapter 23. Now, next week we'll finish this off with 24. It's kind of a different speech, different occasion, but basically it's the same theme with just a little bit of difference there. But it's talking more and more about covenant. Next week we're going to actually be covering maintaining and keeping covenant with God, and that's where Joshua then comes in and says, okay, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord.